Saturday, 1 p.m. Cox goes on national television to explain his position.
I read in one of the newspapers this morning the headline, Cox Defiant. I do want to say that I don't feel defiant. In fact, I told my wife this morning I hate a fight. My mood when I got up was, who am I to be picking a confrontation with the President of the United States? Indeed, even talking about it brings back a certain amount of emotion. I'd been brought up, I've always remembered, if the President of the United States asks you to do something, you do it. That's the way I was brought up. Some things I feel very deeply about are at stake, and I hope that I can explain and defend them steadfastly. That was the great tension. What would be the cost to the country of my having chosen to play the little boy who said, why, the emperor wears no clothes.
Saturday, 2 p.m. Nixon decides, the massacre begins. Alexander Haig is told what to do. He tells Attorney General Richardson, the president orders you to fire Cox for insubordination.
There was nothing that Cox had done or had been accused of doing or refusing to do that could be called an extraordinary impropriety. Not even close. So how could I fire him?
Richardson refuses, then goes to the White House to offer his own resignation, which is not immediately accepted.
Haig probed for some indication from me that there was something I might want enough to be deterred from resigning. He referred to the possibility that I might like to be an ambassador somewhere. The court of St. James's, maybe.
A few steps down the hall, in the Oval Office, Pat Buchanan and Richard Nixon discuss Cox, Richardson, power, and who has it.
One of the things foremost on his mind as he talked to me then was he simply could not have a special prosecutor and an attorney general standing up and defying the President of the United States. And so the President said he had no choice, and I said, you're doing the right thing, sir.
When I went into the President's office, he asked me to sit down, and in a very, very solemn manner.
Nixon tries to persuade Richardson to stay, saying the Soviets could interpret this as a sign of presidential weakness. He says it might lead to World War III. Richardson disagrees.
And the President looked at me very steadily and said, Elliot, I'm sorry that you seem to place your purely personal obligations ahead of the national interest. I could feel the blood rushing to my head, and I mustered as much steadiness as I could in my voice, and I said, Mr. President, it would appear that you and I have a different view of the national interest.
Saturday, 5 p.m. Richardson returns to the Justice Department to brief Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus. Now it is Ruckelshaus who gets the call from Haig. Fire Cox on the order of the President.
That's the only one I've ever confronted, actually, in the years of my government service, where I was asked to do something by a president I really thought was fundamentally wrong. So wrong, I just couldn't do it.
Now Ruckelshaus is himself out of a job. The White House moves to the next in line, Solicitor General Robert Bork. The order is the same, fire Cox. This time the answer is yes.
I did it because it was apparent at the time I was called upon to make the decision that the decision of the President to discharge Mr. Cox was final and irrevocable.
Saturday, 8 p.m. Millions of Americans are watching this episode of All in the Family, unaware that what seems funny isn't.
And you, meathead, turn off the garbage on that radio.
Okay. And thought you'd be interested in hearing what King Richard was up to today.
And shut that hole in the middle of your face, too, huh? Wise guy trying to insult the president by calling him a king.
Why not? Nixon acts like one.
8:37 p.m. The Saturday night shows are interrupted by the Saturday Night Massacre.
President Nixon has announced that he has discharged Archibald Cox as special Watergate prosecutor and abolished Cox's office. The Attorney General, Elliott Lee Richardson, has resigned because of his deputy's refusal to carry out the president's instructions. Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus has been fired.
So the massacre is complete, but the firestorm has just begun. Come back to the fall of '73 and public outrage.
Power doesn't always corrupt, but it always seduces, and it's habit-forming. When you're the president, it's hard to remember you're the caretaker, not the owner. It was the Saturday Night Massacre that reminded people who owned the place and what the deed really said. Tapes, lies, burglaries, dirty tricks, they stopped mattering so much. All that counted was an old-fashioned belief that the power of the president, any president, was no match to the power of a little piece of paper. Call it a constitution. Call it a deed. Whatever you call it, if it was right, then he was wrong.
Throughout his political career, Richard Nixon skirted the edges of impropriety. From his congressional campaigns in California to his dogged pursuit of Alger Hiss to the accusations of a slush fund in his 1952 vice presidential campaign, Nixon was known to his enemies as Tricky Dick. His friends told us that you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs, that the ends justified the means. And America bought it. Less than 1 year before the Saturday Night Massacre, President Nixon was re-elected with an overwhelming mandate. Now, in October of 1973, he's at bay, but he's still battling.
The shakeup is one virtually unparalleled in
Nobody
American
here
history.
can remember anything similar in recent presidential history.
Stunning development and nothing even remotely like it.
Because there has been nothing like it in recent American history. And on Saturday night, after the firing, the FBI is ordered by the White House to seize control of the special prosecutor's office.
There was a kind of a bedlam going on. There was tremendous emotion. People were very upset.
Next, Henry Ruth, the acting special prosecutor, holds an impromptu news conference.
I must say, I suppose that human emotions take over in this kind of occasion, because one thinks that in a democracy maybe this would not happen. And what was emotional was that the law and order administration was defying law and order and trying to convince the American people that they were right.
FBI agents in control of the building are ordered by Nixon not to let a single document be taken from the place. One agent, Angie Lano, stops press secretary Jim Doyle on his way out.
I had these pictures of my wife and kids and the Declaration, a framed copy of the Declaration of Independence under my arm, and Angie said, Jim, just go back and leave it all here. You know, you can always get it later. And I said to him in tremendous frustration, Angie, it's the Declaration of Independence. Just stamp it void and let me take it home.
Good evening. The country tonight is in the midst of what may be the most serious constitutional crisis in its history.
I watched the TV when the firing occurred and John Chancellor came on, and you would have thought we were at this was Austria 1939 or something, and they were on, and these prosecutors were weeping outside, and the FBI agents were locking up the files, and all the rest of it. It was extremely overdone.
At home and in the streets, the Saturday Night Massacre has made people furious.
Mr. Nixon has made it abundantly clear that he does not intend to obey the law of the land.
Impeach Nixon now! Impeach Nixon now!
In the White House, and I believe in the country, there's going to be a spirit of calmness this week.
Our founders did not oust King George III in order for us to suffer King Richard I.